Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today doing another video, and the subject of today's video is going to be on the NBA again. I've been off doing NFL things for a little while, but today I'm back on an NBA topic, and I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different than what I might normally talk about, but what I'm going to discuss today is how people constantly play, or people constantly have the ability to play devil's advocate for basically any NBA champion. I'm going to talk about how uh, all the examples that I could come up with, and then basically like why this is. Why are so many people so easy and freely able to come up with devil's advocate reasoning for why a team won a championship? So without really giving too much background, because I feel like I'm going to do more of that at the end of the video, first I'm going to be going through a list of probably about the last 20 to 25 champs and basically giving what the devil's advocate argument would be for why they shouldn't have won that title. So to start off with, the 2019 Toronto Raptors, the devil's advocate argument here would be that the Raptors only won this title because the Warriors were not healthy, and they took advantage of a Warriors team that was not at full strength at all and was missing their best player, their third best player, and another All-Star in DeMarcus Cousins for part of the time as well. Um, so then the next one would be 2018, which the Warriors won, and I think the argument here would be the Warriors shouldn't have won that title because if Chris Paul would have been able to stay healthy, then they would have the Rockets would have beaten the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals, and the Warriors wouldn't have won the title. 2017, the argument against the Warriors would be that, well, the Spurs actually were a better team and beat you in the regular season and were winning by 20 in the first game of the playoffs, but then Kawhi went down with injury and you were playing an incomplete Spurs team for the remainder of that series. So you won easily, and for that reason you advanced to the finals and then won. 2016, you would argue the Cavaliers shouldn't have won because if Draymond doesn't get suspended, that's a 5-game series. Or if Andrew Bogut is healthy, they would have won that game sooner. There's legitimate case to be made there. You know, if Draymond would have been healthy for Game 5, they might have still won. But either way, that's just the nature of all of these. They're kind of speculative in nature. 2015 is one that people hear about a lot. It's the Warriors would not have won the title if um, Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving would have been healthy and playing for the Cavaliers. 2014, the Spurs. There's really not a ton that you could argue against this one. This is one of, I think, the ones that's more definitive. But I guess you could say Dwayne Wade wasn't really healthy anymore and wasn't really the same player he had formerly been, and so because of that, the Spurs were able to basically take over an overmatched Heat team. But I think that's a stretch because I feel like the Spurs pretty definitively won that finals. 2013, you can argue that the Heat would have lost that title if not for the most miraculous shot ever and Ray Allen making a shot. And if Tim Duncan would have made that little bunny hop layup that he missed down the stretch in one of those game 6 or 7, I don't remember. But if he would have made that bunny hop, then the Spurs would have won the title. So people argue against the Heat in that way in 2013. 2012, this is another one that you can't really make up too many arguments against the Heat, but one that gets tossed around is, well, they didn't really have to face anybody tough in the finals or in the Eastern Conference Finals because Derrick Rose's Bulls weren't really in it because Derrick Rose was injured. And then in the finals, the Thunder were a really young team that was inexperienced and didn't really know how to win yet. And so for that reason, the Heat were easily able to win it all. But again, I'd say the Heat pretty definitively won that finals without many excuses being made. 2011, the Mavericks, people would say, well, they shouldn't have won that title if LeBron hadn't melted down like he did, and only because LeBron put up basically an anomaly of a series as far as a disappointment. That's why the Mavericks won. 2010, the argument could be made that the Lakers wouldn't have won if Kendrick Perkins would have stayed healthy for games 6 and 7, which were the two critical games, and the Lakers barely won the last one. And people are saying if Kendrick Perkins was there, that he would have prevented the Lakers from winning that game through his defense. Again, iffy, but okay. 2009, the Lakers won. But then again, the Celtics were supposed to be the big team that they were going to match up with, but Kevin Garnett missed half the regular season in the playoffs, so the Celtics didn't get to the finals. So they faced an Orlando team that was viewed as a bit weaker. So people think that the Lakers caught a break there. 2008, the Celtics, when they faced the Lakers in the finals, the Lakers didn't have, I believe they didn't have Andrew Bynum, who was arguably like their third best player. Again, a pretty definitive win for the finals for the Celtics, but some people would argue that because the Lakers weren't healthy, they had to totally switch how they were playing. They had to shift Gasol to center instead of power forward, what he had been playing a lot of, and he was more comfortable at power forward, but they had to play him at center, and their depth was shot because Bynum wasn't there to play. Hard to argue for or against, but that's what people say. 2007, people would argue that the Spurs didn't really deserve it as much as they did because the Cavs basically upset the Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals, and the Pistons were actually basically a superior team, but the Cavs just had this one stretch of miraculous play from LeBron that basically propelled a team that was not even supposed to necessarily get past the second round that then got to the finals and were really overmatched as far as talent. And then on the western side of the bracket, people argued that the Spurs had a way easier time because the Mavericks were upset in the first round. And so instead of facing the 67 win Mavericks in the conference finals, the Spurs only had to play like the 51 win Jazz, who were a lot easier to handle. So that's the break for that 07 Spurs team. The '06 Heat, people argue all the time that the reffing was rigged and that the NBA was just trying to get Miami to win the series because they called so many phantom fouls. That one's debatable because it's like reffing stuff, but that is what people say all the time. 2005, with the Spurs winning that year, there's not much of an argument you can make that would say that the Spurs didn't deserve that one. The only real thing I can think of is that like Rasheed Wallace made this terrible defensive play that no one in their right mind would ever be making in the NBA, and that led to like a game-winning shot by Robert Horry. And if the Pistons would have won that game instead of giving up that stupid defensive play, they would have gone up 3 games to 1 and likely would have won the series right after that, or maybe a game or two after that. But because of that, then I think the Spurs, that was like a game that they absolutely needed, and they got it. And without that, they wouldn't have won the series. 2004, the Pistons beating the Lakers. People would argue if the Lakers didn't have all that drama between Shaq and Kobe, that they would have had their minds right and then they would have won pretty easily. People also, you could make the argument that Karl Malone wasn't healthy, which he wasn't during that series, and that's why they lost because although Karl Malone wasn't the best player, they were actually running a lot of offense through him. Not that he was the one scoring, but they would run offense through him where he would be like, they'd position him at the high post and he would run offense for the team. And he was also like a leader and a locker room guy that was really good for this team. And with him injured, he kind of stepped back from that role a little bit. 2003 Spurs. Not much you can say about this one to argue against them, but yeah, I mean, I can't really think of anything that people would argue against the Spurs in 2003. They pretty definitively won it. The only thing you could say is maybe that the East was super weak at this time, so in the finals is a fairly easy matchup, but it's pretty clean. Not much you can argue against. 2002, you would argue the Lakers got a big break and that the refs totally helped them out in the Western Conference Finals, and that was their big break. 2001, when the Lakers won, again, the same thing as the Spurs in '03. The only real argument against them is that the East was super weak, so like the finals wasn't even really a matchup. Like people knew it would be a foregone conclusion that the Lakers would win. But this one's pretty untouchable. This is one of the ones that really no one can make a counter argument against their validity of winning it. But you go on to the year 2000, people would say if the Trailblazers don't have this immense collapse in the Western Conference Finals, Game 7, then the Lakers would have never got to the finals, and maybe we would have been saying the Trailblazers are NBA champs. So like they got a huge break in that the Blazers melted down for really no reason. 1999, people would say number one, the Spurs took advantage of a shortened season where teams weren't as in their flow as usual, and basically the NBA wasn't as accurate because the games were more limited, so the seeding in the playoffs was a little bit more funky. So because of that, the Knicks upset the Heat in the first round and made it to the finals. And basically, the argument would be that the Knicks were a 500 team, and so the Spurs got to face a really cakewalk of a team in the finals. Also, Patrick Ewing wasn't healthy for the finals, so they faced a greatly diminished Knicks team as well. That would be the argument for the 99 Spurs. 98 Jazz, or excuse me, 98 Bulls, you'd argue that they got the break because Karl Malone made that boneheaded turnover in Game 6 that led to the Bulls winning that game, whereas a lot of people thought that if he wouldn't have done that, the Jazz would have won that game, and then being at home for Game 7, they would have gone on to win it. Let's see here, 1997 finals, people would argue that if Karl Malone makes those free throws, the Bulls wouldn't have won the title because the Jazz would have won Game 6 and then been at home for Game 7, so they would have won that. Those are kind of weak arguments to me, but people bring them up all the time. 1996, there's really no argument against this Bulls team. The one thing you could maybe say that I don't think would be really accurate or necessarily true is that they didn't have to face the Rockets again in the finals because the Rockets were sort of seen as the one Western Conference team that the Bulls somewhat struggled against because they didn't know how to handle Hakeem. But I don't think that's so hypothetical. It's really hard to say that that's a legitimate devil's advocate argument. 1994, or excuse me, 1995, you could argue that the Rockets only won that because Michael wasn't in the league. Same with 1994 with the Rockets. Both those two championships, a lot of people argue, well, the Rockets only won that because Michael Jordan wasn't playing. Okay, fair enough. And that's really where I'm going to stop, guys. I think that's technically 26 championships. I was aiming for around 25, but that's the last 26. And I think my general thoughts on this are that it's so easy to pick apart anything. Like, these arguments that people are making all revolve around, well, this team didn't perform as well as they should have, and that's why the other team won. But that's like any sport. Like, the best example to me would be, I'm trying to think here, the 2011 Mavs only won because the Heat played badly. That's just a bad way of looking at it because that says the Mavs didn't play good to win. It's just that the Heat lost and the Mavs happened to be the other team that were around. I don't think that's a good way to look at it because if the Heat are playing bad, that's because the Mavericks are playing well and they're stopping them and they're scoring and picking apart the defense. That doesn't mean that the Heat are just bad. It means that the Mavericks are outplaying them. Same thing in almost any of these finals. Like when people say, I'm trying to think here, some of the other ones that were really obvious to me, like the 01 Lakers. Like, there's really nothing you can take away from that title, but when people say, like, well, the East was just really bad, that's why they won it easily, it's not their fault that they played really well and they were really good. Like, you can't take anything away from them for that. Let's see here, some other ones, like the 1999 Spurs is one where it's like, yes, the Knicks didn't have Patrick Ewing, but it's not like the Spurs can help that, and it's not the Spurs' fault that the Knicks upset the Heat, who were the number 1 seed, and it's not the Spurs' fault that they played an 8 seed in the finals. Like, you can only play who's in front of you. So I think a lot of these arguments really are just silly, and if you look at any context of any situation with these NBA matchups, you can find something that plucks apart why the team was able to win and kind of downgrades the accomplishment. Like, there are a lot of teams here where I honestly didn't have much of an argument, and there really isn't one. Like the 2012 Heat, people even would argue, well, in a lockout-shortened season, teams aren't as well prepared for the playoffs, and so the Heat caught a break because teams were unprepared. I've heard that argument on sports talk shows. I've heard the whole argument of the Thunder were underage and they weren't ready to win yet. I've heard that a ton of times. The thing about the Lakers getting help from the refs, the thing about the Miami Heat in 2006 getting help from the refs, that stuff I don't know really what to make of because we don't really know the answers. We heard in 2002 that was rigged from Tim Donaghy, but I don't know. I'll take all that with a grain of salt at the same time. But I guess my main point here, guys, is any NBA team that wins a championship can have somebody poke holes in them winning a championship. And what it boils down to is, at the end of the day, you can only play who's in front of you. You can't control what's going on for the other team. Like this year, the Raptors can't control that Kevin Durant was injured, and they shouldn't be viewed negatively because they won in that situation. We should just look at them and congratulate them rather than say, well, they wouldn't have won if Durant wasn't there, because that's discounting what they did, which was win the championship. That's just my little rant for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know below what you think is one of the most ridiculous sports arguments that people make when they're trying to be a devil's advocate. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.